Welcome to Leadership and Culture in Healthcare. I'm Matthew Wynn, the podcast host, and we're on to our next chief executive in this series. And I am delighted that Julian has joined me. Julian, introduce yourself, tell people who you are, who you work for, and the type of organization you lead.
Yeah, welcome. I'm Julian Emms. I'm the Chief Executive of Berkshire Healthcare. And Berkshire Healthcare is quite unusual. It serves a population of 1 million, and it's 50% physical healthcare and 50% mental healthcare. So that's quite an unusual combination. Relatively new organisation, formed in 2001, was mental health and learning disability only. And at the time I became Chief Executive in 2011, that's when it doubled in size and took on the community services. So effectively 2001, new organisation, 2011, effectively a new organisation again, really. And although the risk profile of mental health and community services are quite radically different, there is an underlying coherent philosophy to it. And that's really around maximising independence and quality of life that really helps sort of bring the thing together. We are known for stable leadership. So I've been here for 12, 13 years as chief executive, something like that. And there's only ever been one other chief executive of Berkshire Healthcare, and I was the deputy before that. And we're only on our third chair. And also that's also the case with quite a lot of our senior leadership and executive. And I genuinely believe that, and we can touch upon this if you like, but if you cut a good organisation through, you'll find 4 or 5 key characteristics. And one is definitely that stable leadership, because, you know, you can do strategy and you're also accountable. You know, people hate it when people say, oh, that was the other lot. There is no hiding place, good and bad, for myself and the chair. And then the other things we're sort of known for is we're the sort of most mature in terms of digital of all community mental health trusts. And we were cited as an exemplar in terms of NHS impact, in terms of quality and improvement. I haven't always been in the NHS, though. I'm not a lifer. I've had this is my second career. So I started off.
I love that you said, I'm not a lifer, as if that was something we should put you in, you know. Well, come on then, tell us what you were doing before your second career. Was it legal, by the way? Because we just be careful what we say on a podcast. Okay, just checking.
So I think it's quite usual that people get into senior roles, have quite a significant formative experience at some point in their career. Mine just happened to be in my first job, when I had the most difficult job I've ever done, first job up. And at 2021, I left Manchester and came down to Reading to work as a support worker in a probation hostel called St Leonard's. And the probation hostel was 21 men who'd committed very serious crimes and were on licence or on bail for those crimes, ranging from murder all the way through. And 9 to 5, there was a probation officer and a support worker. From 5 o'clock till 9 o'clock the next day, and at weekends, we were there by ourselves. No on call, no ID, nothing. So I don't need to explain that anymore. You can imagine the extraordinary situation I found myself in managing that unit. It's defined me in terms of many of the skills I bring, which have actually retrospectively been extremely helpful. But it also led to a very skewed worldview of work, which I've had to relinquish, as well as a sort of slightly rough and ready view of what resilience is, and again, which I've significantly had to refine in the latter part of my career. Seconded to be a probation officer. Probation officer is a really good job because, you know, you're in court one minute, the next you're in someone's house, you're in the police cells, you're in prison. You get a sense of integration or not integration and stuff. So it was really helpful around that. So I did that for 5 or 6 years, and I left. I didn't expect to leave, but I experienced a poor organisational culture and a poor line manager. And on a whim, at sort of 31, with a young family, I joined the health service, Wexham Park Hospital, which was still the mental health provider. It was acute trust, but it had a mental health rehabilitation unit. And I joined as a ward manager, and we'd call it a G grade, I think, when I first arrived. Now it's a band 7, but first line management. And I really cut my teeth. And it's like being a mini chief executive, you know. You've got all the sort of things that you have to sort of do. And I really cut my teeth there. It was quite a small ward. And I stayed there till my sort of early mid-30s. And then a series of really ridiculously quick promotions through middle and senior middle management, 2000 to 2004. And in 2004, I'm the coup at Berkshire Healthcare. So a really quick acceleration after a slow sort of start career-wise. Coup, then deputy in coup. Then I dropped the coup role altogether 2-3 years before I became chief executive and picked up that wider portfolio of strategy, ED&I, HR, marketing and communications and transformation. That really helped that transition from exec director to chief executive. So that's really what I was saying in terms of, yeah, when I use the sentence LIFO, yes, in relation to the probation service, but in a different way.
And when you go back to the organization, so you talked about that continuity, you from 2011, but you were there before, 2 chief execs. How has that continuity benefited Berkshire?
Yeah, I think a couple of things really. You can do long-term planning. So I think the NHS's biggest weakness is its short-termism. Of course, there's a political element to this, election cycles, but there is still a thinking that's quite short-term. So, our first OD strategy in 2012, post-merger, was a 5-year strategy. Digital was similar. So you can start to really plan out those things, which I think are helpful. You're accountable for what you've done, which I think I covered off. I think that's sort of quite important. You can build trust, and you have time to build trust, and you also have time to build an impact culture. You can't just do this like turning on a light switch. It takes a while, and I suspect you've heard from others and yourself that some of this stuff can take 3-4 years to really take hold. And so that's the difference, really.
And that building of trust and culture, was there something that kind of forced the organization to do something different, or was this very kind of organic?
No, I think it was a mixture of the two, really. So if that merger happened in 2011, the first 12 months, we were just sorting out the basics, as you imagine, making sure it was on the same policy and procedure. And then in 2012, we had 2 non-exec directors. So this is the influence of really good boards. We had 2 non-exec directors. One was the managing director of the Waitrose stores nationally, and one was a HR director of a blue chip sort of company. And they were into staff engagement before we were in the NHS. And this was sort of their bread and butter. And there was also then research coming out in relation to the NHS and staff engagement. So those 2 things came together. And the non-executive directors put a challenge down and said, look, we've done this merger. It's pretty safe now. If we want to improve, and we need to get into this as a people-to-people organisation, we need to do some more around staff engagement. On the back of that, with that evidence base, I think people could see that was the case. But I thought it was helpful to get examples from other industries, because the NHS is a bit insular sometimes. So hearing from others was really helpful. And this was the start of what we called the Nicholson Challenge, or the austerity period. And so we didn't really have an OD budget, and so we took a leap of faith on the basis of that board intervention, on the basis of that evidence base, and started to spend some money in some longer term sort of stuff. Nothing special. And I emphasize nothing special because when people come to see us, they're always disappointed, because actually getting the fundamentals absolutely right in itself and hardwiring it is hard work. The joy and the special bit is the results, not the input. And so we did all the things you might expect. So I'll pause there. It's like you were going to
give people a view, give the listeners a view on what are those fundamentals, because I think my reflection on sitting through lots of these conversations recently is what people view as fundamentals and are simple things and normal things in an organization are not with everybody else. So help us to kind of codify what those fundamentals were that you got right.
Yeah, I mean, the first is that with that coming together in a merger, going out to all your stakeholders and people and sort of refreshing your vision and values, so sort of, so people can have a say about what type of organization it was. That was really helpful. If you go back to what I said in my formative experience and then that latter part of the probation career, I said I left, didn't I? And I left because of my manager and the leaders. And that, still with me to some extent when I talked about it. Yeah. And so we've got 98 sites. I don't know what's happening in Hungerford or next to Heathrow Airport at the moment in those our managers have got to take responsibility. And we have people who are mainly clinical managers. They're a physio one day, the next they're the team leader, and we weren't providing them with the right support. So we introduced what we called an excellent manager program in-house, because we didn't have a load of money, doing the basics, leading people, leading teams, leading change. And of course, over the years, we've made sure we've incorporated ED&I and a number of other things in terms of that, but allowing people and giving people at least the fundamentals. We were one of the early ways of the kind of listening into action, and we still do listen into action. So, a going out, really listening to, what's getting in the way of achieving the vision and then acting upon it. We just completed 2 weeks ago, 500-600 people. So we've been doing that for a decade now. It's quite helpful just to surface some of the key issues. Appraisal, the evidence base of a really meaningful, stretching, well thought out appraisal is nailed on. So revamp the appraisal process, but also prioritize it as a top priority. Stable leadership I talked about doesn't happen by accident. So we've had in 2012 talent management and succession plan baked in every year, twice a year, a rigorous process. And to check on how well we've been doing on those things, we did, in addition to the staff survey, I always say the staff survey is at least a cup of tea. It's got a bit longer these days with the number of questions. About 6 months later, every year for 13 years now, we've done a pulse survey, which is sort of an intermediate step. Yes, it's got the net promoter stuff in. It's got 10 other questions, the staff engagement plus a few others. And we always stick an odd one in that was a movable feast. So have you seen any improvements in your managers, once we've introduced that course, that type of stuff? And what happened after hardwiring that, we went from a bang average staff survey to the top end of upper quartile. And then with the confidence of that, it allows you to focus on your problems, ED&I. Some of the high pressure teams in sort of mental health or where leadership's going wrong. And the next phase, and this was really helpful, because I think it's hard then, the incremental change. The next phase, phase 2, I call it, we've got an outstanding clinical leader called Deborah Lee, and I'm going to promote a podcast she did with Michael West. So just go on the Leadership Academy, Michael West, Dr. Deborah Lee. She's an expert in compassionate care. So she leads our trauma and veteran service across the southeast of England and has delivered compassionate therapy as part of PTSD therapy for a very long time, is a international expert in the area. And she said, I think we can also do this as part of organizational culture. Why is it some patients are puppets and some are problems? Why is it we can send them awful emails to our colleagues and all the rest of it? And so she developed an in-house course. And the fact that she was able to come forward, I think, was symptomatic of the change in culture. Stick a hand up, let's come forward. And we developed a compassionate leadership course. And again, I'm really concerned that some of this language sometimes can appear a bit fluffy. So let's make this real. So it was about your own self-awareness, what makes us lacking compassion, what's a right code of conduct around compassion, how do we make the right moral choices, and how do we sometimes, what is it allows us psychologically to behave in a way that's suboptimal. And that was profoundly impactful on the organization. And again, we've weaved that now into our induction, and we've weaved it into the excellent manager sort of the program as well. We introduced a formal innovation pipeline called Bright Ideas. Again, not the chief exec's pipeline. I'm really clear to make this sustainable. This has to be business as usual. And we have monthly town hall events where people can speak to the entire executive and senior leadership team. Still 500 people tune into that. They like being able to quiz it. We're homing in on our anti-racism. And then about 8 years ago, we developed a quality management improvement system. And I use those words carefully, not QI. I go to organizations and I see QI as a microculture, whereas the first thing we did, and the most satisfying thing I ever did as a chief executive, was learn the leadership behaviors of quality improvement with my executive colleagues. And then we learned that we needed to align the organization on a small number of important things so we could use our improvement muscle to fix it. And the tools came last. they came last. Anyone can learn, the tools of an improvement methodology. But if the organization hasn't got the right culture, they won't thrive. Or if there's 1,000 flowers blooming, things won't work. So I think we worked really hard on that, and that really pushed us. And that's where we've got to now. Now, when people come and talk to us, they say, "Oh, we're doing all of that." And I suppose sometimes I'm a bit spiky, and I say, why is it not in the survey then? Because in a sense, if it is, it would be coming through. So there's something about the level of seriousness, embedding, checking, and making sure you're avoiding fads and really nailing this stuff down. I can't think of a better description other than sort of hardwiring it, really. I don't know if you've got a better description.
Well, I mean, interestingly, Michael West, who I will defer to every day of the week, as I clearly should, talks about that culture being and becoming the DNA of the organization. And it's whether it's the core, the center of the rock, however you slice it, you'll get that all the way through. And I think you described it quite well there, Julian, where it was something that isn't going to change because of the leadership at the top. It's woven into the tapestry. I don't know how many different analogies I could use, probably, but woven into the tapestry of how you do things. We don't do tapestries nowadays, I guess, but I think that's the reality of it. And
yeah, and I think so. What I would say with confidence now is, you take me out of the organisation, I think you'll still be talking to Berkshire Healthcare next year and the year after. Yeah. I'm really confident about that. And the other thing that I was just reflecting on, because that's quite a long list, is that the other thing that people focus on is they think that if you just create psychological safety, everything will fall into place. And I say it's creating a culture of psychological safety alongside operational excellence. You've got to have some kind of improvement thing that the culture allows in order to deliver that high quality care. And sometimes people overemphasize or underemphasize one or the other. And I think they're really important that we keep a track on that. And if you do, you see improvements in your kind of performance, efficiency, money, all those types of things.
I think that, again, you said earlier, you used a fluffy word. I use the fluffy word occasionally because it's that thing of a compassionate leadership is being compassionate to drive outcomes, which is both for your own staff, but for the local population. And you just described it there as it's operational coherence, it's operational performance. And therefore, we are public servants. We're paid for by public money, aren't we? We're here to do a job.
Yes.
And that's the grit, isn't it, in actually getting that right, but doing it well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also being able to fix your problems with it as well, because we're talking about the nice stuff today, but most of us have got significant patient safety challenges or all the rest of it, and it just allows you to get your arms around those things that much more easily, doesn't it? Success begets success, so actually the problems become a little bit more surmountable.
And the way you just described all that, Julian, is very clearly very eloquent, but very systematic. Was it as planned and as systematic as you just described, or is this a rear view mirror issue? Is that you're looking back and you can see phases of it? I'm intrigued because, when one puts all that together, that's like, whoa, if I've got to start with that, that's a massive journey. But my guess is you might have planned some stuff, but you took opportunities as things goes on and you pivoted and you did this. And talk a bit about that for us.
Yeah, so I talked a bit about at the beginning about stable leadership and 5-year plans. So it's the subject of 2 separate 5-year sort of planning things. So you're right. I mean, I probably gave you indigestion with all that stuff just in one sort of go. But the reality of it is that in the 5-year plan, that what I call phase 1 was there, but some of the stuff didn't happen until year 4 or 5. And that is, there's no getting away from the fact that you do need that stability to be able to do it, because we didn't have the money, we didn't have the resources, but also we would overburden the organization and managers if we did it all so quickly, it would fall over. So it was too effectively organizational development policies over a 10-year period. And of course, there was some bits that we didn't originally have that appeared, because obviously, as life changes or information changes, you go with that. But 85% of it was executed as kind of planned, if you like, in terms of the core principles. But if it sort of relieves that sort of, oh my God, this is just impossible, it's over a 10-year period.
And you talked about if you were taken out the organization. I don't mean that in a kind of mafia way, but if you were not in the organization, you had the confidence that that approach would sustain and carry on. How have you enabled that to happen then? And I know you've implemented all these things, but how will you ensure the continuity of that leadership will then carry through?
Yeah, I think this is where succession planning and talent management and doing it really well helps, because if you do it really well, you keep your best people, you keep them interested, you bring in new talent, but actually you've always got somebody on the shortlist. And if they've been around and seen the benefit and have got the expertise and experience of this, they won't want to let it go. So there's the sort of, if you like, the knowledge base that exists in the organization. People do not want to let it go. They see it as important, and they're able to describe it, just as I would be able to. And then secondly, as I say, this is sort of built in, the training for managers, the compassionate kind of leadership, the quality improvement program. We've had 2 executive directors join since we did the exec training. They've all had to go through the program and the training, and that's the expectation. And of course, the board is really important, and the chair, the support of the chair and others, and they have been absolutely instrumental in supporting and championing this work. We often forget that, and focus on the chief executive, but really the board and others play such an important part. And then I've deliberately done a number of things, deliberately sort of made things sort of mainstream, like the innovation pipeline. Some people call it, the chief execs fund or whatever. It's just, I don't buy that kind of thing. When we go out and do service visits, we have a standard in it in terms of our quality improvement for every director and senior leader, not just the chief executive. You know what it's like. There are many sites you've got and 2 organizations. You need your entire team pulling together to get that senior leadership engagement and visibility. So it's things like that. And the other thing, which I think is a bit sort of countercultural at the moment, everybody's saying you've got to be all over it. You need grip as a chief exec. You need to be all over it. I say delegate, delegate, delegate. And as I've got more confident and more experience, I do that more with delegation. So my deputy, I know you've got a deputy, taking on more. They in fact led the listening to action sessions this time and everything else. So really helping to bring people on. But that delegation is, while speaking to my younger self or a new chief executive, I'd say just don't get sucked into the prevailing narrative too much. Of course, there are times when you have to be over a particular issue, but that delegation is really important, and it's not so common.
And I guess my view on that would be it's impossible to pull off what you're describing about succession and talent management if you don't trust your team to deliver and delegate to them, because otherwise they're not ready then to lead properly, are they? So it goes hand in glove, doesn't it? I mean, and also yes. I just think I really don't understand how organizations can't do anything but trust their leaders. If you're training them well and you have the ingredients right, trust your leaders and let them flourish. Surely that's the best way.
Yeah, and also I've got big gaps in my leadership capabilities that others are expert at and I'm not. And so it would be sort of crazy not to be engaging them and using them. So they get me out of tight fixes. They think through differently problems. I mean, the system sort of, conundrum at the moment, which is integrated care, is the opposite of what I thought it was going to be. I can say that to you because I know you're in the same type of organization, a natural collaborator. This slightly bizarre world we're in at the moment, a very complicated external world. I rely very heavily, on my exec colleagues and senior leadership also to help me make sense of stuff as well. I find it a great source of comfort. So it's it's two-way this.
And thinking about you then, Julian, rather than the ingredients that you've kind of put that we've just talked about, how would you define your personal impact on the organization as the chief executive?
Yeah, okay. Without repeating too much, I'd say I built teams. People would see that I've really emphasized sort of the nature of teams at every level. So we know, Matthew, that great teamwork is a huge asset in terms of resilience and high performance. And you can't expect people to do that if your own team's not exhibiting that, really. So it creates sustainability. I think I've built up trust in the organization. And I think at a time when there's mistrust in leaders, I think that's worth its weight in gold. In fact, it's your license to lead. I don't think you're without it. You have the title, but if people don't trust you, and I think it's not. Our affairs are seldom led by giants. These mythical creatures. What do people really want? Why would anybody want to be led by me? And I think that I'm competent. I know what I'm about, but I also can acknowledge my mistakes. I'm reliable. I've got integrity, and we've touched upon the benevolence, sort of compassionate piece. And I think people would see that. And I think the other thing that I've really developed a skill set in is making the complex simple. The NHS makes things so ridiculously complicated. I remember me as a support worker, and now me talking to a support worker. People don't know what systems are or the baffling language of the NHS. It's bewildering psychobabble. To try and convey complexity as simple as possible so that you can get people aligned in your organization is a skill. And I think I've done that well, and I get good feedback from the induction around that. So making the complex simple, I think, is really important as a kind of leadership asset. I think sometimes if I use the language that people in the NHS do in that probation hostel, I would have been fried alive. The lack of connection with the people I was sort of effectively leading, because I was leading that by consent, that hostel. It would have been crazy. So I think they're some of the things that I've brought. I'm also quite now honest about just saying, I used to do this, I got it completely wrong, and I've changed. And I think people find that quite refreshing. The bits about resilience, and I talk about that ridiculous worldview I had about individual resilience that had been an individual thing, and actually now understanding it's very much a team sport, and that great supervision and teams and support and everything else builds a level of resilience that's so it makes things psychologically safe in a different way. So being able to do that, and we have quite a laugh in the organization. I mean, just think about the places I've worked and the things we do and the work in the nature of the organization. So induction, I take a sideways look at previous visions and missions we've had in the organization, which were all about the organization being brilliant and amazing and everything else. And no one cares. No one cares about that type of stuff. And in fact, when I was more junior, I used to parody those things, in other organizations. So, and that gets a bit of a conversation going with people, I think. Does that make does that resonate?
Humour is always a good thing, and so one thing that always trips me up, as my team would readily tell anybody, is like, "Oh, what's he said now?" Earlier, though, Julian, you said you left your organisation in the probation world because of the culture and because of the line manager, and you came into the NHS and you started on that forensic route, etc. And here you are, a confident, insightful leader, X amount of years later. What's informed that change? And I'm sure moving out of something that wasn't pleasant is informing in its own right. I know that. But how have you been? What's molded you to be the person you are now in terms of a leader?
Yeah, that's a couple of things. I wanted to make a difference. And when I went to the hostel, I felt I made a difference. And in this role, I still have a direct line of sight to making a difference. That's why I like being in a provider organisation. So that's important. But in terms of the development, a couple of things. I do like to learn on the job. I've learned a lot about, so you said that previous negative experience, I learned a lot from that. I've had a few good senior leaders and mentors, particularly during my middle management phase in the NHS. I've done some formal but not extensive leadership sort of studying. I read. I read a bit more. I read things like the Harvard Business Review and bits and pieces like that, which I like, and go to other industries. So I've gone and done visits to other industries, particularly through QI, and sort of learned from that. Learned quite a lot from our non-execs from other sectors. We've been sort of blessed with some really good people, and the chairs I've had as well. That chief exec chair relationship is really important. And I've learned a lot from some of the clinicians I've spent time with, because there's a huge sort of overlap there, really. So a combination of sort of some more formal, semi-formal, and learning on the job has sort of been key for me.
And how then? And you've talked about some of the pressures some of the pressures that you face every day, that risk analysis, the mental health world, just to take the mental health world is full of risk. And you think about how many organizations are under inquiry now and are just really struggling in that approach. So what sustains you to kind of create, to continue to nudge that culture that allows the freedom for your staff to flourish?
Yeah, there's a couple of things in that. The first is, which we didn't touch upon, but when the organisation was originally formed, it wasn't formed particularly well, no due diligence. So it was in turnaround for the first few years. So as an organisation that was in sort of turnaround, and it's been quite a slow journey of improvement for 10 years. And then we've got, and one of the things that I'm genuinely fascinated in is the incremental bits now between how do you continue to make year-on-year improvements? Because some of the changes I described earlier on were relatively straightforward to get things embedded. So this next phase, I think, is a real challenge to continue to do that. I think it's really important in terms of high quality care that we do that. I love being in the organisation. I learn a lot from peers as well. So I've got a good peer network who I sort of learn from. One of the things I talked about was I do delegate a lot. So I don't read emails when I'm on holiday, that gets picked up and everything else. The one thing that I've never, ever cracked is intrusive thoughts. So the practical tasks I put down out of hours, and I've been doing this a long time, but often people say you're not present or you're worrying about something or whatever. And I know there's techniques for that, CBT, and where people, but I just can't sort of crack that. So that's the bit that sometimes, can be quite challenging, because you can't know everything as chief executive, but you do care about everything, and sort of managing that. And I do admire people who can do that sort of better, because that is not just wearing for me, but it's wearing for those people who you're around as well, if you're not present sometimes at weekends.
And that's what switching off and creating space and clear water from work.
Yeah, that's right. And I've got sort of 4 kids, 4 grandkids. I do a bit of sport and stuff, so all that helps. But despite all of that, that's the one thing that when people ask me about chief exec, I say it's not the hours and stuff. It's the sort of that sense around the great stuff that's going on, but also the challenges. And it's I can't just switch it off like a light switch and those thoughts, really. And that's the bit that I've always had to battle with, really. It was there at the beginning as being a chief exec, and it's still there now, actually. I made no progress.
I often have I've got dogs and regularly walk them as you have to and love to, and that's often when I do my thinking and I come back, and I have to say my team groan every time when I start the sentence with, whilst I was walking the dogs I was thinking. And if they'd had their own way, I think they would get rid of my dogs and stop me thinking so much in that respect. It's the same thing, isn't it?
Exactly that.
The brain's whirring all the time.
Yes, exactly that.
And then thinking about, you obviously spent a long time in the organization thinking about succession and your future stars. If we got people listening to this podcast and thinking, oh, I'm interested in how to become an NHS leader, what's the advice? And it's always a bad thing to get, long into chief execs giving other people advice. But what would you say to younger self to say, what should you do? What would you maybe have done differently yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've been encouraging because I've loved this job. You can't stay in this job or not do it. And I do feel that I've had a great career. So I think there'll be some natural enthusiasm, which would be helpful despite me being long in the tooth. I think people would get that positivity. But I would also be quite challenging, because I am a little bit. And I would say avoid the fads. The NHS is full of fads. And please get yourself a benchmark that's sensible and serious, so you know how you're doing. What really matters is what your patients think, what your people and what your partners think. And we know for, in terms of people, the staff survey is present. So how are you measuring what your patients are saying? How often are you doing a reputation audit or a stakeholder audit? So you know what people trust those, not articles in NHS Journal, how many tweets you've got and all the rest of it. Really go with substance, even if it's countercultural. Home in on those things and you will not go sort of far wrong. I'd advise them to then seek out those organisations that are doing well, and it may not be the usual suspects. So look at the evidence, go and find those organisations, make friends with them, buddy up with them, because it'll be really helpful. Look outside the NHS, and always remember about the importance of communication and language, and remember not to get too embroiled in the technocratic side of things. This is a human business, people to people. You won't go far wrong. What do you think? Do you think stay clear of the new recruits? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that's a great list. I often think that a good test. One of my teams, I think my EPR teams, are that we've got to tell NHS England how we've responded to X, Y, and Z coming down the line. I always think a better one is we should be telling them how many we've immediately deleted, because it's that point of how you focus on the, no offense NHS England colleagues who I've worked with in the past, but how you focus on the right things rather than everything, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And there's some things it's knowing with let's call them the wider regulatory bodies, and there's a lot of them at the moment. You have to service those, but there's a way in which you can do that, and just simply servicing them will not allow you to do a good job. And making sure, so that's where that sort of list of sort of thinking about the really important metrics which will sustain and keep you in good stead, really. That's why that's really important, even if they're out of fashion.
And I was very taken because the ethos is right. One of our colleagues on one of these earlier podcasts said, I've got two objectives. Are my staff happy? And are my staff supported to deliver great care, which they recommend to their families? And if you get those two dynamics right, you've pretty much cracked it.
Yeah, I think so. You're certainly on the right lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Right lines.
Yeah. And then finally, Julian, because you've been at this a good while, I'm not suggesting you're old in the tooth by this. This is not down that route. But what do you look forward to? What are you looking forward to in the next? Because you've talked about two periods of really interesting work, 2 5-year cycles. You must be into your third kind of 5-year cycle. What's on the to-do list next that is exciting you?
So there's something that's really exciting me, and I think is potentially a really fruitful area. So if you think people are talking about flexible working, a hybrid working in a way I don't think is very sensible. So let's think about flexibility having 3 elements to it. One is there's a group of people who can work in a hybrid way to some extent or another, and out of 5,000, about 1,000 in our organisation that do that, and they're very happy. Some organisations have said, well, because some people have to come to work, we'll stop that and you all have to come in a certain amount of days. I think that's absolutely wrong. I think we should celebrate the fact that some people can do their jobs well there, and as long as we advertise it very clearly. And of course, the A&E doctor or the paramedic expects to be doing face-to-face, not hybrid working. But what we've got it wrong there is we're not giving those people the flexibility of time. Our rostering is poor, it's second rate. We don't allow people to self-roster enough. And I think there's a huge opportunity, which I've seen in North America, around better rostering at scale. So we've got to meet the individual's needs for flexibility. We've got to meet safe staffing and contracted hours. And you know what, Matthew? We leave that to a ward manager now on an individual. That is not the right scale. So I've got a huge mental health inpatient unit. We should be doing it at that scale, and we should be taking that away, that sort of mental conundrum away. If we get that flexibility right for those groups of staff who don't have flexibility of location, we'll do well. And then the third area is this area about what do people do when they come to work. So we're just running at the moment more robots off a Microsoft platform than anywhere else in the country, taking away the dross of kind of referral management, recruitment processes. They cost between £5,000 and £15,000. Everybody's got a Microsoft platform, but it's taking away those kind of routine jobs and allowing the receptionist to answer the phone for those people and all the rest of it, really. And you'll have some ideas in your own organisation about redesigning kind of work. So what we want people to do. I think those three areas of flexibility have great prospects, particularly the middle one, where I think we're on the cusp of being able to make a real change there. We must give those people greater flexibility around time. So if you're working on a ward in your organisation, 12 weeks hence, you can go to the sports day. even though you're walking on. That's what people want. And if we crack that, I think we'll retain and enthuse people at a level we've not seen before in those roles.
Yeah, well said. Really, really impactful in terms of what's happened. Well, Julian, it's been fascinating listening to you. A really interesting career, probation, Bell Hospital, through to chief executive of a high-performing organisation. Love the list of, I'm not going to repeat them, getting the fundamentals right to be really impactful, make sure that actually it's, I think you were saying, psychologically safe, to make sure that we're really great at our operational performance. It's all for a purpose. It's all for greater outcomes. Fantastic focus on your personal impact, but living and breathing it through the team. And then a glimpse of the future. The Eames robots are going to take over to allow our staff to be fabulous at what they enjoy doing, which is, frankly, great customer service, isn't it? And getting it right for our local populations. Julian, thank you for spending time with me on leadership and culture in healthcare. It has been a delight, and I'm sure people will be enjoying and responding to what you've said.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much.